probably a little trouble with my title. Who thinks the Astros cheated in 2017? Who thinks they didn't cheat? All right. We'll talk about that as we go along. Thank you for the introduction, John, and thank you for the invitation. So, oh yeah, I have this. Okay, who am I? You've heard that already. Let me talk a little bit about the PhD in American Studies, because I think it's relevant. You saw that I work a lot on, and since this is about the curious mind, a lot of my work comes from being in this program in American Studies. And so what is American Studies? Well, I'm not gonna ask, that's dangerous. But let's say an American Studies person was teaching a history course about the 1920s. They would be most likely to use not just political history, but would talk about cultural history, like read something like The Great Gatsby. And if we were in a literature class, we would want to know more about why someone wrote well, we know who wrote it. Fitzgerald wrote The Great Gatsby in the 1920s. So American Studies people are always trying to make sense and put things in context. We want to know why something was made at any particular time. And what were the motivations? What were the cultural factors around it? Why this thing right now? So my Johnny Cash book started with a very interesting observation, well, to me. So I'm from Connecticut, and all I knew about country music growing up in Connecticut in the 70s and 80s was that it was terrible. Now, I've changed my mind, but I moved down to Texas, and one of the things that you know when you're in a good job or a good place or in a good program is that you see the people around you and you're like, these are my people. So immediately when I got into my program, I'm like, oh, these are awesome people. We're having great conversations, and they like all the same bands, but they like Johnny Cash. That doesn't make any sense to me. And so those of you who know Johnny Cash know that he's kind of country music, but he's kind of rock and roll, he's kind of folk, he's kind of a lot of different things. So the first book, basically, over a long gestation period, came from that first moment where I'm like making sense of Johnny Cash. And I would say the Houston Astros book has a very similar moment. And I was living in Austin, and Michael Lewis's Moneyball came out. Does anyone know that book, Moneyball? And those of you have seen, and some people have seen the movie, I assume, right? So that to me was a really interesting book, because I was like, because I knew how baseball worked a little bit. I used to be a sports writer, and I knew that a lot of people chose players because of how they looked. Sure, they looked at the batting average, sure they looked at the earned run average, sure they looked at all different things. But this was thinking about ball players as data, and dissecting what they did and putting into categories. And we can argue about whether that's healthy or not, and obviously there's problems with that too. But I would say that when I was thinking about talking today, and I'm talking tomorrow at my old apartment, I was thinking a lot about like, oh, I bet that was the seed that brought me to this book some 20 years later, 25 years later. Just a curiosity about why something is the way it is and how things turn out. And so most of my work now is done in sports history, but I did write about Johnny Cash as well. I'm so used to doing that. So this is Astros and Asterisks. It's a book about different points of view about the baseball scandal in 2017 and 2019. It has 16 essays. I wrote one of them. Some of them cover the ethics, some of them cover the history. There's one about the trash can, the history of the trash can in there. There are 2 European scholars talking about why this is an American scandal. There's also a chapter, which is one of my favorites. I'm not supposed to have favorites, but about the scandal in 2018 when the Astros picked up Roberto Osana, who had been suspended for domestic abuse. So it covers it from a launch point of view. It also interviewed Tony Adams. Does anyone know who Tony Adams is? Who's Tony Adams?
He made Stein Sealing, Scandal.org.
Yeah, so he's in the book too, and we talked for a couple hours. He was supposed to write, but it ended up being a Q&A. But so I wanted everyone's perspective on it. I didn't want it wasn't to decide whether the Astros were guilty or not. It was really to think about like, what happened? Why did this weird, very, very weird scandal? Like, cheating is not weird, sign stealing is not weird. Banging on a trash can after looking at a TV screen is very strange. So why did this happen at this particular moment? Okay, so I'm just gonna, for those of you who are not familiar with the scandal, I'm just gonna kind of run through it really quickly to talk about what happened. Not everyone's a baseball fan. So one of the big things that the Astros did in the what do we call them? The 2010s, I guess is they turned to analytics. They hired a general manager, Jeff Lunau, who was a former McKinsey consultant who'd run a pet food company before he got interested in baseball and became very number driven. And one of the things, if you're number driven, and some of you, do we have any business majors here? Does anyone work on spreadsheets? Is anyone a spreadsheet person? Well, I can tell you, if you go into business, you will do nothing but work on spreadsheets and PowerPoints. Those are the language of business. And so they would put everything on a spreadsheet. They would try to figure out who was going to be a good baseball player, and they did. They got rid of a lot of players, drafted a lot of very young players, and kind of brought them up organically. That's why people really fell in love with them, because you got to know all the players as they were really young, and they got better and better and better. And then in 2017, they were on the verge of winning the World Series. So someone had an idea in the office of charting the signs that the catcher makes to the pitcher to tell the pitcher what ball to throw. Sign stealing, I mean, giving signs, that's very traditional. It's been done for over 100 years, but not everyone has done that. Like I don't know if you guys know who Yogi Berra was, but Yogi Berra is one of the best catchers of all time. But when he started, the manager didn't trust him to convey the signals, so he conveyed the signals. But if you know what pitch is coming, you have a very big advantage in baseball. If you know it's going to be a fastball, if you know it's going to be a curveball, you have a huge advantage. So anything that could give them an advantage, they tried to use. So they made an entire spreadsheet of that. And then someone had the idea, like, well, how do we get this to the batter? And they figured out they could take a camera and broadcast the signal to the dugout, and then the players could figure out what it was and then bang on a trash can to let the batter know what was coming. So very elaborate. And I'll talk about why that camera was there in the first place. So this is the scheme. This is from a television station in Houston. There was a camera in the outfield, a catcher, and a dugout monitor. So the camera went to the dugout monitor, the players banged on the trash can, and that's how it worked. How was this discovered? Well, in 2019, two journalists from The Athletic published a story detailing this whole scheme. They weren't sure if it happened during the World Series, but it happened all season long. And the closing thing they got was an interview with a former Astro, Mike Fears. Baseball suspended everyone that was involved in it, gave the players immunity so they would testify, and then all their teams fired their managers and general managers and everything else. Carlos Beltran was a supposed leader in the clubhouse for doing this, and he was fired before he managed a day with the New York Mets. Everyone's reemployed, by the way, except for Jeff Lunau. So one of the fascinating things about this scandal was the fact that once the story came out, within hours, people were posting videos showing that this actually happened. And I appeared on a podcast a few weeks ago, and I was listening to earlier podcasts, one with Tony Adams and the host, and they were talking about like how they didn't believe it, and then as soon as and this guy is named John Boy. I don't know, does anyone watch John Boy's videos? Yeah. If you guys are sports fans, he does a lot of like breaking down the video and showing what happened. Something he like breaks down like fights, right? Like all sorts of things. So he broke this down, and you can hear the bang, but he puts very helpfully puts up the bang there. And if you just Google John Boy sign stealing scandal, you can go hear that. You can go see that video for itself. It's still online. Then Tony Adams, who was a lifelong Astros fan, was very, very upset by the scandal. And he says, I need to figure out how much they really cheated. And so he sat down and he wrote a program that allowed him to chart pretty easily all the pitches, and this is the result. So you can see in the beginning of the season, not much banging, and then all the way from May all the way till the middle of September, they banged quite a bit. This is the only public document of this in the videos. The commissioner's office gave a report, but they didn't show anything like this. So it's very interesting that an amateur, I mean, he's not an amateur programmer, but he's just a fan. And it stops on the 21st because a pitcher on the Chicago White Sox figured out the scheme. And he would have told everyone, but no one asked him. So he says, yeah, I would have totally given it up because the banging on the trash can, well, we'll talk about that in a second. So amateur fans, I don't like to call fans amateurs, just fans. Fans figured this out. So other fans kind of went after the Astros. It happened right before COVID, and of course, what was everyone doing during COVID? We were highly online, right? Highly online. And the season was suspended. There was a little bit of chicanery at the beginning, like people banging on trash cans during spring training games, but then everything was canceled. I was going to come here and interview people for the book, but obviously that was a little bit more challenging during the middle of a pandemic. By the way, this is one of the reasons why I think Astros fans were so, defensive, I guess is the right word, but like why they turned so quickly back to defending the team. Because people just were relentless. They were just picking on them left and right. And no matter what happens, if someone keeps picking on someone you like, even if they've done something wrong, I think your natural inclination is to turn around and defend them. So what I'm interested in, that's the rundown. What I'm interested in is a little bit more of the context of why we are here at that particular moment. What happened that led up to that particular moment? So the first thing I will say is that baseball is, by its very definition, a game of deception. The idea is that the pitcher tries to deceive the batter what they're going to do. Base runners try to deceive the catcher into stealing. Players will move around while being set up to try to trick the batter where they think the ball's going to go. And if you have a game of deception, and maybe all games are games of deception, but in baseball, people try to figure out the deception. It's just natural. Does anyone know this? What this screen is of?
Catch a ball base.
Yeah, it's called a hidden ball trick. And so the hidden ball trick is that you pretend to throw the ball back to the pitcher, but you really hold it in your glove, and then the person will lead, and then they will tag them. It doesn't happen very often, but it's pretty amazing when it does happen. So yeah, that's the hidden ball trick. And see, I'm a Yankee fan, and even I put up an anti-Yankee thing up there just to curry favor with you guys. Okay. Sign stealing has happened forever, and it's happened with technology forever. So this is a story about a Philadelphia Athletics player who had a buzzer connected to the batter to tell him what pitch was coming. This is in the late 19th century, 1897. So sign stealing has been around forever. As soon as there's been signs, there was sign stealing. And this doesn't quite make sense, but baseball has really had quite a lot of scandal attached to it. Not one that I think it's been around a long time, and there's so many games, right? There's 162 games a year, 154 before the 60s, and so all of a sudden, you just have all these things that happen. And so baseball writers, I think, are pretty primed to write about scandal. So I think that's one thing. Does anyone know what this picture on the right is? The left is the White Sox scandal in 1920, where the Chicago White Sox threw the World Series because they had money on it, essentially. Does anyone know what the picture on the right is?
It's Bobby Thompson's home run at Polo Grounds.
Do you know why that's up there?
Because we now know that he knew what was coming.
Yeah, they had a telescope. They did the same thing. So this is one of the most iconic photographs in baseball history. And this scandal happened in 1954. So again, there's always been technology. We don't think of a telescope as technology, right, at this point. But like everything at one point was technology. If you showed a pen to Benjamin Franklin, he would think it was a miracle. That you could just hit a button and a pen would come out the bottom, and then you didn't have to dip it into an inkwell. You know, all these things that we take for granted are miracles. Okay. Another reason why this happened is that competitive advantages are more important than fair play in professional sports. The incentives to being, is this still on? Can you guys hear me? Okay. The incentives for being a good person in a sporting event are pretty low compared to winning a game. Not because humans are inherently evil or anything like that. It's just that there's so much money and status involved in these games that cheating really seems like anything you can do to get an advantage you should do. It's why the steroid era happened, the steroid era in the 1990s. If you were a second baseman and you were hitting 252 and had hit 3 home runs, and you knew by taking a pill you could bat 290 with 30 home runs and go to the major leagues and make millions of dollars, that would, and you're 23 or 24 and you're getting passionate, like a lot of people made those choices because competitive advantages are more important than fair play in professional sports. And not only just professional sports. I'm sure everyone here knows an example of someone that cheated at a lower level too. Teams assume and often know other teams are cheating. So this is public knowledge. By the way, this is not this is not what happened on the Apple Watch. That's a drawing. But both the Red Sox and the Yankees were warned by the commissioner's office that they were using Apple Watches illegally to get information about what pitches was coming. It wasn't quite the trash can scandal, but it was bad enough that the commissioner's office had to step in. And so it did not broadcast curveball. That would have been amazing, though. So far we have a sport that has a history of deception, a highly competitive environment, and a culture that allows sign stealing. So sign stealing, again, not illegal. You can sign steal, and what Evan Drellick, who also writes for the book and was one of the reporters that broke it, writes that the other method is called the base runner method, which is pretty common, that a batter on second who can read the signs will convey that to the batter at the plate. And that still happens. It's not illegal. I think Aaron Judge, sometimes pitchers do something called tipping their pitches, which means by the way they set up and get ready to throw, it's pretty easy to figure out what they're going to throw. And so people are always trying to figure that out. Sign stealing is not illegal. The uniqueness of this scandal, the high tech and the low tech, a very amazing camera and banging on a trash can, I think are one of the reasons that this made this so prominent. And this was fostered by change in baseball culture, the rise of data and analytics. So before we start, baseball has always been a numbers game. Who are baseball fans in here? So what does the number 300 mean to you? Batting average, anything else? Home runs, wins. What about 100? What?
Weighted runs created plus.
You're into the analytics. So all these RBI, it used to be RBIs in a season was 100. 20 was the amount of wins in a season for a pitcher. Also, 3.0 was ERA. Every baseball fan for 100 years knew what good numbers meant. Then all of a sudden, that changed with new formulas that were much more complicated. So one of the reasons I'm good at math, even though I'm an English major, is that I used to calculate my own batting average when I was playing baseball. And by the way, it was not a good number. I was a terrible baseball player, but I was a pretty good basketball player, and I would also do that calculation in my head. So I got very good at calculating things in my head. But you can't calculate any of the numbers that analytics uses in your head. They're formulas, usually done by spreadsheet. So there are basically two categories of information. One is called qualitative information, and one is called quantitative information. Qualitative information is any type of information you get through observation or experience, anything else. There's probably a much better definition than that. And quantitative is numbers. So for a long time, numbers plus qualitative observation was the way that people made decisions about personnel in baseball. That really switched to quantitative observation in the 21st century. So on the left, this is from the movie Moneyball. We have manager Art Howe, and on the right we have Jonah Brand. And so on the left, we have a manager who has played baseball and then managed baseball for dozens of years. And on the right, we have a recent college graduate who got a degree in economics from Yale. And in very stark terms, the way baseball switched is from valuing information from that person to valuing information from that person, right? That seems weird, right? To think about this person with a lot of experience and knows how to do something, and this other person who's really good at making calculations on a spreadsheet. And that's why baseball has been embroiled in a debate about how much one or the other they should be using since I think Moneyball came out. The other thing that happened is that in the 21st century, for a long time, I think most baseball teams were owned by family businesses, people that did very well in a traditional business like owning restaurants or real estate or airlines or all sorts of things. And then in the 21st century, more and more people who are involved in tech, more and more people involved with hedge funds, which are a type of financial institution, became involved in baseball. So traditional businesses do obviously value the bottom line. They're very, obviously you don't stay in business if you don't make a profit. But they often looked at baseball teams as something that was sort of business plus, something they can enjoy being an owner of, owning a team comes with a lot of privileges. You can, talk to famous people, you can invite famous people places, you can do all sorts of fun things, and make money pretty easily because people like going to sporting events. These new owners were way more, were not only very smart, but they thought they could take their intelligence that they learned in their fields, which is to find value. Value is very important for for hedge funds owners and for tech people, and innovation, I guess, was the other thing. And they thought they could take those lessons and apply them to a baseball team. Does anyone know who this person is? It's John Henry, the owner of the Boston Red Sox, and he started his own hedge fund, and then used the hedge fund to buy first part of the Florida Marlins and then the Boston Red Sox, and he was the owner when the Red Sox won their first World Series since 1918, largely because he hired the sort of the grandfather of all analytics, Bill James. So one of the things you do when you want to do new measurements is you start adding pieces of technology. And one of the things that people do a lot of is add cameras. Cameras are really good because they can, and the really fancy ones, can slow observations down to like a millionth of a second. So you can see how a ball is spinning. There's something called spin rate that's very important for pitchers now. You can see where batter swings might be going awry. You can see all sorts of things with cameras that observations just cannot do. You can tell, a lot of people who are sports fans can tell when someone's a good player by the way they swing, but oftentimes they can't explain why it is, and cameras really help that. So that's why that really high-powered camera was in the baseball stadium, was to help with this analytics. So they were used to capture things like spin rate and batting mechanics and everything else, but they ended up being used to capture the signs in addition to the original purposes. Someone suggested transferring those signs to the players in real time, and then the scandal was born. So, and we went through that. So one of the weirdest things about this, when looking at this, is that it is unclear whether banging on a trash can helped the Astros at all. So these are called splits from home and away. And believe me, the Astros know their splits. Like, this is like fourth grade level understanding of statistics. Anyone can understand home and away. And their record on the road, where they could not bang trash cans, was actually better than their record at home. Their batting average, better on the road. All the fancy statistics better on the road. So why? Why did they do it? They knew these splits in the season. Why? I think this is on your sheet. So I'm going to answer you. Well, for one, it was easy. I mean, it didn't really require very much effort, and it worked. It was fun. I don't doubt that they had a very good time doing this. And then there was momentum, because there was a point where the manager asked them to stop doing it, he broke the monitor, and then they started up again. So there's something about the momentum, and probably even superstition. I don't know, is anyone here superstitious? Or just a little stitious? Sorry. Had to throw in my office joke. Anyway, yeah, so I think it just started happening, and the season was going so well that they wanted to keep going. There were a few barriers telling them not to do this. No one said people knew it was wrong, but people were like, it's probably felt harmless. And they weren't caught. So if they got caught very early in the season, I suspect that none of this would have happened. They just would have stopped doing it. But most importantly, I think, is that they thought they could get away with it, and they wanted to win. The Astros had never won a World Series. So they thought they were taking every possible advantage, and they never thought they were going to get caught. So my takeaways from this, cheating with technology crosses the line. You can cheat in other ways, but if it involves like enhancement with technology, people are going to be very upset. The type of cheating reflects changes in the game and technological development in society. So it was a telescope in 1954, and now it was a high-powered camera. And the podcast host asked me this question: why did people make such a big deal of it? It's because the Astros had won the World Series. If they hadn't won and they found this out later, no one would have cared. So in a weird way, their success made them vulnerable to this charge. Why did I edit this collection? I was very interested in exploring ideas from multiple angles. As I talked about at the beginning, I was interested in putting a cultural phenomenon in context. The history of the writer's cover, I've already talked about this a lot. What I didn't talk about is why fans have trouble moving on for their team, because there was this whole thing that some Astros fans or ex-fans tried to convince other fans not to be fans anymore, and it did not work. There was a few, but not very many. Why players and personnel overrode ethical concerns, and how technological innovation fueled this round of cheating. And so my talk talks about why putting this in context. And I'm happy to take any questions.
So a casual observer, would they have noticed this increase in banging on the trash cans? And why is that? Was it not loud enough?
I think, so the podcast I was on, when he had, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name, they had Tony Adams on, and they were talking about this. They said it was because the sound was so infrequent, and there's so many sounds at a baseball game. There's people yelling, there's lots of movement, and even the pitcher that found out only figured it out near the end of the game. He figured out more because they knew what pitches were coming. He's like, I'm throwing these great pitches, and they know it's coming, and that's how he figured it out. So I don't know. I think, has anyone ever done the experiment where they have someone come in and say something and then leave, and you have to figure out what they were wearing and stuff? That's sort of the testament to why that might have been the case, I guess.
Why didn't they void the World Series championships? What was the reasoning? I'm not arguing for the rightness or wrongness of that, but what was the reasoning? For instance, I coached track and field for 25 years, and if you get caught using performance-enhancing drugs in track and field, you lose your gold medal. You lose your silver medal. I mean, it's vacated. So what was the reasoning for not vacating their World Series championship?
I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, I think a lot of people called for it, but I think in a weird way the commissioner just didn't think he had the authority to do that. That it would have required a much higher level of decision, and maybe he knew that the evidence didn't show that they had actually won the World Series because of the banging, I guess.
Yeah.
It would have been unprecedented. It would have never happened in any major sports league except for NCAA basketball, but those are usually vacated, I don't know, like there's some distance from that.
Right.
So I don't know, that's a really good question. I just think it would have been a really hard decision. And I don't think I think maybe they just didn't think it had enough impact on the season. And maybe he felt like public shaming was the punishment.
Who else in Major League Baseball cheated that year? It's documented, that's for sure. Other teams that cheated.
The Red Sox and the Yankees.
And what did they do? Similar thing or something different?
They used the Apple Watches.
They really did.
Yeah. But it didn't say curveball on the. That was a little specific.
So what happened to them? Were they punished or?
They got a stern warning.
That's all.
Well, the Astros didn't actually they lost a draft pick and had to pay $5 million, which was covered by probably $100 million of souvenirs purchased by you guys after they won the World Series. I don't think it really covered, I mean, I think they made a lot of money from, the other thing that I don't really didn't talk about here is that, when you put together a team like that, you also save the owner a lot of money at the beginning. They went from a payroll in the hundreds of millions down to the lowest payroll so they probably saved, I don't know, hundreds of $millions by putting together a very young, cheap team. And so that's also what often happens with analytics too. It ends up saving a lot of money. That's really what the purpose of Moneyball was to save money for the owner by having a good team. So that's there too.
As someone who hasn't read or watched Moneyball, I wanted to ask, how does analytics, is it proven that it really benefits teams, massively?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think what it does is, so I know, for example, in basketball, one of the most valuable players, basketball is, I think, about the same level of baseball in analytics, and basketball is the sport I know best. But anyone know who Draymond Green is from the Warriors? So, yeah. Pretty much for a period of 6 or 7 years, he was one of the top players in the league by the stat called plus minus, which measures your impact on the team on the court. But if you look at his statistics, he sometimes broke double digits in points, in rebounds, but averaged 6 points a game and 4 assists or something. But he was such a good defensive player, and in previous times, they might not have noticed how good a player. They might have said he's a good player, a good backup, but sometimes it allows you to identify who's going to be a really good player out of traditional numbers. Is anyone, baseball, who here knows baseball stats? You guys over here. Is there a good example of a baseball player that's kind of a great analytics player, but maybe not as well known as more flashy players?
Not so much this year, but last year, Alejandro Kirk. He was one that in 2021 was really high up analytically, but didn't perform. And then 2022 was an all-star and performed to those numbers before.
Yeah, there's a lot of, in the last 5 or 10 years, there's a lot of pitchers with 12 wins or 13 wins that made a really big impact on their team, but the team was not good, and you could tell through these statistics that they had really good seasons. Brooks Raley, and a couple of very old-timey pitchers like Bert Blyleven, who I think only had a winning record a few times, but won 280 wins and had much better long-term statistics than a lot of players who are in the Hall of Fame end up making the Hall of Fame. So it does work. It's not, I think what people would argue is that it has to be a balance of numbers and observations.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. Around 2017, I was at the Montgomery campus. I was an employee there.
Yeah.
And at one of the, I think it was a graduation ceremony they had, or an event that they had, a lady from the Houston Astros marketing statistics division came and talked to us. And what happened, this was more a human thing than it was statistics. But the analytics and the statistics showed that Altuve was performing poorly in the dome, but when he went on the road, he was doing so much better.
Yeah.
The analytics showed that whenever he was at bat and he was facing a certain direction, there was a glare that was coming towards him. So in the dome, but when he was away, that wasn't there. So they made the adjustment on they did they made the adjustment to eliminate that glare that was coming in his eyes, and that's why he performed so much better.
Well, and Altuve rejected for the most part, did not take part in the banging.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you guys like Jose Altuve, continue liking him, because that was true.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to ask about, is that he didn't take part, and obviously nothing was proved in terms of the allegation that he got wired when he hit that walk-off against the Yankees.
Yeah.
So in your view, why has so much anger been directed to Altuve in the period since, when the team goes on the road?
Well, I think part of it is that he won the MVP over Aaron Judge. I mean, I think the Yankee fans are pretty loud and brutal online, and so I think that's part of it. I mean, I do think that 2022 really changed a lot of people's minds about the scandal. It sort of put it in the past, the fact that they won another World Series, and Aaron Judge also won the MVP. Maybe that helped a little bit too.
So I read a story, it was a while ago, but it covered how Jeff Luhnow and like people in that organization would manipulate TrackMan data so then to like up prospects' value for trading. Is that covered anywhere in your book?
It's not. Did you read that in Evan Drellick's book?
I think it touched on it. I haven't finished that book yet.
That's a really good book.
Yeah, I'm reading it right now, but it was an article. So
Yeah,
I did an excerpt from it.
yeah. I mean, that doesn't surprise me if that was the case. Yeah.
Question. Do you believe that if they did not cheat, they would have won the World Series?
Yes,
Okay.
I do. I really like I really like the Astros. I lived in Texas for 8.5 years. I've been to the Astrodome, and I really like them. I like the way they were building their team. I didn't know any of the stuff behind the scenes, and I would have. I obviously could not root for them against the Yankees, but well, you wouldn't. You wouldn't root for the Yankees over the Astros if they were a young team. It wouldn't matter. You can't give up your fandom just because you like another team. But yeah, so I think they would have won. I mean, I think the statistics show that they would have won otherwise.
So not really a question, but a comment.
Okay.
So the sign stealing was obviously a big problem, and the Astros were not the only one to do it. But that did also, the sign stealing helps change the way that the pitcher and catcher communicate. Now there's a pitch column
Yeah.
on the pitcher's
Yeah.
belt.
Yeah.
It's even harder to steal the signs. So
It is, although I bet they'll find a way to figure that out too.
yeah, that was my question. Do you think they'll figure
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's so. For those of you who don't know, there's now an electronic system where the catcher communicates with the pitcher through. I don't know how it works, but it's not very complicated, right? It's just like a button on the catcher.
Those are like belts.
Yeah, and not everyone uses it, but that's the way many teams communicate now. And the other thing is that I didn't talk about this, but teams all know who's cheating and not cheating. They don't tell the press, but if they know that they're cheating and not cheating, they take more precautions. Like the Dodgers against the Astros changed a lot of their signals a lot, so the Astros couldn't keep up with them.
Is there anything to be said that maybe does the cheating that happens a lot, does that potentially add to the interest of the game?
I think so. I think people like I don't know. I mean, I think people were watching the Astros a lot in 2020 and 2021 because of it, for sure. Wanted to see what was going on. I do think that a little bit of scandal is good. Not the scandal of. I think one of the article I talked about before, the person who wrote about the domestic abuse scandal associated with the Astros, she thinks that's actually a much bigger scandal than the sign stealing scandal. That was her argument.
One thing I want to tell everybody in the audience is that Jonathan does have copies of the book for sale. If you want to buy the book.
I also have magnets that you can have for free. You don't. I made magnets. I was like, I don't know. College students, do they want to buy a book? But they might want a magnet.
One thing that I'll add to what it's worth, and I think people, I don't know why people forget this, but they do, but that Houston had the worst natural disaster in American history in 2017. And so the Astros winning the World Series was some really good news after Hurricane Harvey, and I think which might help explain why people, in addition to just being loyal to your local team, there's also, that was a really good moment for the city at a very difficult time in the city's history.
Yeah, I actually didn't know. I mean, when I was talking to Tony, I didn't quite realize the depths of that. And Lawrence, I can't remember his last name, wrote a book about, the guy who just wrote a book about Texas a few years ago. I wasn't quite aware of how bad it was. My parents were flooded out by Superstorm Sandy in Connecticut, and they had to move out of their house and live someplace else for 6 months. So maybe that was another reason I was sympathetic. Who knows?
This will be the last question.
Okay.
Okay, so how bad do you think the reputation of cheating in 2017 affected the Astros? So I also want to add this. In the 2022 ALCS against the Yankees,
Yeah.
Aaron Judge hit a pop fly caught by Kyle Tucker,
Yeah.
and it was out. But the Yankees were, they made the comment that because the roof was open, they knew it would be a wind in that pushed the ball in, even though that ball would have only gone out in Yankee Stadium.
I'm gonna let that one. I'm gonna let that one go to the backstop. But I don't know. I mean, I think people will always think of that Astros team as being a little bit tainted, but they won't think of that about the 2022 team. That's what I think. That's what I would say. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, you guys are in Houston. You're a little biased.
So on the roof open, MLB makes the Astros open it, so it'll be quieter in there.
Was it MLB?
It's too much-
Yeah, I mean, the Yankees lost, the Astros won. That's what I would say. Is that a good way of ending a talk in Houston? Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more content from LSC-Kingwood.